Welcome everyone to the CALS workshop for March 2022. We are going to be talking about hybrid events and how to make the most of them. Today we are joined by two excellent members of the University Communications Special Events team. Ellen Klingler is the Executive Director of University Special Events, and she leads a team that is dedicated to planning and executing strategic live events that inspire and nurture a culture of pride and place. Ellen earned a degree in corporate communications from Elon College and landed her first professional job at the University of North Carolina System Office. It's there where she forged a career in special event planning before joining the NC State Chancellor's Office in 2006. In 2013, responsibilities for Chancellor events and university advancements were consolidated under Ellen's leadership. Thank you, Ellen. And Chelsea is an event producer in university special events. Prior to joining NC State last August, Chelsea was the special events manager at the UNC School of the Arts. There, she managed multiple hybrid events before hybrid became a thing, including the Powering Creativity Campaign launched event, which won a 2020 Silver Award for a single day event for Case District 3. Thank you for joining us, Ellen and Chelsea. I'm going to kick it over to the two of you to lead us through hybrid events.
Super. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here. We have some slides we were going to share along the way. And I hope that this will very much be a conversation, less a presentation, because we recognize that we will likely learn just as much from y'all as you might learn from us today. And so thanks for that introduction. Again, I'm Ellen Klingler. I have been at NC State for, I guess I'm in my 15th year now. And it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm joined by my coworker, Chelsea. Chelsea, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here this morning. And although I have planned hybrid events, I'm not an expert, so don't hold me to it.
I think it is fair to share that we are part of University Communications, which is within University Advancement. And so as we shared with Janine earlier in the month, we are really now at this point an in-person first office, but we do plan hybrid events, and we took the deep dive like everybody did at the beginning of COVID. So we are excited to talk to you about what we know and to hear from you about what you know. So here's a little bit about our office, just so you know. Again, University Special Events, our mission and vision. And then to transition for what we're going to talk about today, we're going to first define events, because I don't think you can talk about event management without that. We're going to talk about hybrid events and some best practices that we've learned along the way. I want to dabble in the big picture because it's so important to everything that we do as communicators, and then leave some time for Q&A. So to dive right in, to talk a little bit about event planning, this is where art and science meet. And I think this is very relevant to NC State, because people ask me often if I can tell them about NC State and if I can define NC State. And I tell them that it's where art and science come together, and they have babies, and then those babies go and change the world. So event planning is a little bit like that. Would you agree, Chelsea? According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, there are a few definitions for event. Something that happens, an occurrence, something that is noteworthy. It's a sports contest. They lost me at definition number 4, where they started talking about the space-time continuum and the postulated by theory of relativity. Yeah, no, I have to skip over all of that. For university special events at NC State, we define events as live communications opportunities. And I think that this really speaks to why university special events falls within university communications. because it all comes down to these live communications opportunities. So right now, these days, we're all really focused still on what the CDC considers to be a gathering. I think that we are still defining events by the number of people that are at events. And again, for university special events, we like to condense this down where 2 or more are gathered in person, whether that is online, in person, or both. We consider that to be an event. I think that this is where it's a fine line between an event and an experience. But we see all of it as a reflection on the university. So that's why we condense this down to 2 or more are gathered, it's an event. So what is event planning, and what encompasses event planning? And I'm sharing this diagram because I think that this is really important to understand really the amount of effort and teamwork that goes into event planning. And as communicators, I wanted to make sure that you understand that we very much see the marketing of the event, whether it's marketing the university or marketing the event itself. That is a key component and a key part of the event planning stage for us. So it requires a lot of people, a lot of project management, and it also speaks to why event planning and public relations managers are often found in the top 10 list of most stressful jobs in America. It's because of this diagram that you're looking at right now. There's a lot to juggle. And these are live events. There's no back button to anything that we do. And so people ask me often, why did I want to become an event planner when you see all of this? And for me, it's, it kind of comes down to, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I plan live events instead of jumping out of airplanes. And this speaks to that, I think. So somebody that I've really started taking a deep dive into is a woman named Priya Parker. And Priya is, she's an expert, well, I guess a professional facilitator. And she likes to say that she brings meaning to meetings. And these are her rules, her new rules of gathering post-COVID. I added rule number 6 because I feel like the follow-up is so important. But just to quickly review this with you, rule number 1 is to give your gathering a purpose. And we say that often in university special events. I hear a lot, oh, it must be so fun to be an event planner. You get to go to all these parties. No, these are not parties because of parties. These are parties that are associated with a very strategic purpose. We are gathering these people for a very thoughtful, engaging reason. And then number 2 is maybe one of my favorites, is make purpose your bouncer. I think that this is a great description of why that strategy is so important right off the bat. Design your invitation to persuade. So as communicators, you know, and I hope you agree, that the event begins from the very first reach out. So whether that's a save the date, an email, a postcard, an invitation, whatever it is, your event begins for guests the minute they receive the first notification from you. Rule number 4, ditch etiquette for rules. I think that this is interesting because what Priya is saying here is that etiquette can be a little bit stifling. And so what she's suggesting is that if you create some temporary rules for your gathering, so whether your rule is no laptops, or I guess that would be for in-person, or for hybrid events, you don't speak twice until everybody speaks once. So if you set these temporary rules, you create a space that is less stifling for people and more inviting for everybody. And so, but making sure that those rules transfer to your hybrid audience, whether they're in person or online, I think is a really important takeaway. Rule number 5 is to close all your gatherings with intention. What's the takeaway? Is there an action item? Is there something that you're asking your audience to do? And then I added rule number 6, because it's super important to us, is to follow up with your guests with intention. So Priya Parker, write her name down. If you're interested in meetings with meaning, you might be really interested in learning more about her. So this is a great transition into Chelsea. So how are we going to make these hybrid events the best event ever? So Chelsea, take it away.
Thank you, Ellen. That was a great transition. Yes, we are in a world where hybrid events are becoming the new normal. This is not going away. This is something that's going to stay with us well into the future. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, we're going to define what a hybrid event is. So it is an event in which there is an in-person audience and a virtual audience participating in the same live event at the same time. Now, I am going to share with you some best practices, but like I said at the beginning, I am not an expert. I'm sure there are things that you're going to learn from me today, but there are things I'm going to learn from you too when we get into our Q&A and start talking about some of your questions. So Ellen, if you'll go to the next slide, we'll start talking about what some of these best practices for planning hybrid events are. So just as Ellen shared with us, just like you're planning an in-person event, you have to start with your purpose and your goals. These are your guideposts for everything that you do related to the event. If you don't know why you're doing it or what you want people to do or feel because of this event, you shouldn't be doing your event. Having your purpose and goals well defined in advance will also help you decide what is the best event platform to use, what is the best live streaming service, what kind of tools are we going to use to help build that engagement and the connection between our in-person audience as well as our virtual audience. And one thing that I want to mention too is that when you are planning a hybrid event, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. What might work for one type of hybrid event may not work for another one. And it's all because it goes back to your purpose and your goals for why you're doing that event. So how do you get started? Plan your virtual event first. Your virtual event is going to be the more challenging one, in my opinion. So you really want to think through, what is that home viewer, that virtual audience's experience going to be? As I'm sure you all have realized throughout this pandemic, those of us who are planning virtual events have had to wear a new hat, and that is of being like a television producer. The events that we're producing virtually are very comparable to what you see on TV or streaming services, but you have to think through, what is the experience going to be like for that person who is clicking into your program? What do they see when they log in? What do they hear? Is there anything going on in the chat? How does that program begin? You want to be really mindful about the flow of that program, as well as what other production elements you have included, like video or music. Because one of the things that really good TV producers are aware of is that they're competing with a lot of other distractions. And that's what we're having too with virtual events. People are sitting at home, maybe they're in their pajamas, maybe they have kids running around, lots of things that could pull them away from your virtual event. So you've got to think through, how do we keep their attention? And that's the same for hybrid events. Once you've planned your virtual event, then you start adding in that in-person event. And once you've done that, now you determine where and how those two events and those two audiences intersect. And again, we go back to the why. Why are we doing this event? What do we want to accomplish from this? And when we say that they intersect, it could be as simple as both audiences are watching the same program at the same time. It could be as complicated as they watch the same program at the same time. Then they go into breakout rooms or smaller breakout meetings. And those are just, they're conversations between both types of audiences. It really depends on what you hope to accomplish and why you're doing this event. With your hybrid event, it's crucial that you have a really dynamic and engaging host, because this is the person who's going to guide both of your audiences through the event. It's really important that that host acknowledges both audiences. to bring that awareness to both groups that there are different types of people watching this event. You're not just sitting there with the person next to you in person. There's also a viewer at home who's experiencing the same thing. And that just brings it to the equitable experience for all of your attendee types, making them feel like they're all being engaged with in the same way. And when you have these hybrid events, another thing that's really important is to consider what kind of in-person elements you can replicate for your virtual audience so that they have as close as possible an experience to the in-person one. So one thing that I have done in the past is I will send an event kit to all of my virtual event attendees, and that kit will have items in it that are very similar to what the in-person audience has. So maybe it's a cocktail kit so that they can make a cocktail for our virtual cocktail hour while the other people are here having the in-person cocktail reception. Or maybe it's little snacks that they can enjoy while everyone else is having a luncheon. Just trying to bring those items together to make those people feel like they are having a similar an experience as the in-person folks. And if you'll go to the next slide, please, I'll talk a little bit about some of the technical and logistical best practices for your hybrid events. You want to rehearse, because there are a lot of elements involved in hybrid events. You think about it, you're really planning 2 events at the same time. So you've got to make sure that you and everyone on your team knows exactly what is happening, when it's happening, why it's happening, and how to do it. I always recommend at least 2 rehearsals, one with just your AV team, so they are all on the same page about the technical and production elements, and then another one with your speakers. And with these hybrid events, you want to make sure that your speaker is absolutely comfortable addressing both audiences and also kind of going with the flow, because you don't exactly know how this event is going to go. So they need to be flexible and dynamic in that way. Also, if your speaker is participating virtually, you want to make sure that you build in a speaker test with them well in advance of the event. Ideally, you want them to log in to your virtual event at the same time that the event is going to take place, as well as in the same location that they plan to log in from on day of. This is so that you can check all of their connections work, that their mic is good, that their background works. For example, mine is not the best right now because I have a window behind me, so that's a no-no. You want to make sure their lighting is really good. And if your budget allows, like if there's anything that needs to be adjusted, maybe you could send them those things as a thank you for being a speaker, but also it enables them to have the best presentation possible. You want to establish separate teams for your virtual and in-person events. Again, it's like 2 separate events. So you need a separate team for your virtual folks. Maybe that includes your chat moderator. You may have a host specifically for your virtual event attendees. You also need to have your tech support team. That's the team that's going to help all your virtual attendees make sure they can log in properly. If they have any questions, if they're having issues, that's who's going to take care of them. And of course, you have your usual in-person team as well. And the thing that I like to do is create a big master timeline for everything that goes on with both events at the same time, so everyone knows exactly what's happening. So you're not making decisions that might negatively impact your other event. You need that awareness for everything. The other part with your teams is that you want to have clear communication channels set up for both types. So what I do is I set up a text, like a group text for my virtual team. I also have a group text for my in-person team, and then another one for everybody in case there are things that everyone needs to know. For my virtual team, I like to do it on my phone, communicating with them rather than on the computer, because there's a lot that they're already looking at on the computer, and you don't want that. Like we're on the Zoom meeting right now. If a chat box randomly pops up and I'm sharing my screen, everyone's going to see that. So we don't want to run the risk of that happening. But again, that's just so everyone is on the same page and you have a way of keeping tabs on everything that's happening. You always want to have your backup plans. As I'm sure you all know, with virtual events, you want to be hardwired connected to the internet because Wi-Fi can be spotty. So always want to make sure you're hardwire connected. If you are using the Wi-Fi, make sure you have a backup, like a hotspot ready to go just in case. Particularly with these hybrid events, if something goes wrong and the live stream goes down, one thing you want to do is make sure that you do have emails or communications already drafted and ready to hit send, so that you can send those to your virtual attendees so they know exactly what's happening and when they can expect to get logged back in. For speakers, you may want to consider pre-recording their presentations in advance, especially if they are planning on logging in from a separate location, not your in-person venue. That way, if they're having any technical issues on their end, you still have that presentation and can air it as a like live experience rather than cutting it all together. Ellen talked about the rules for participating in an event. So another thing is that you want to make sure you've got very clear instructions to your attendees for how the event is going to run and how people will be participating in the event, especially for these hybrid ones. That way everyone knows, someone is going to be talking on the computer, you're going to see them on a screen. If we're in person, we need to use our mic so that the virtual audience can hear us. Laying these things up front makes it easier for everyone to understand how the event is going to go and manages those expectations. And for your tech support team, I'll just mention that's really important to have a troubleshoot guide for them, so that you want to think through all of the potential issues that might happen for that virtual audience and how to address them. So your tech support team is well equipped to address any issues that a guest might come to them with. On accessibility, if you have the budget, I do recommend investing in a live captioner for your event. It just makes the captions run more smoothly. Zoom has a pretty good live transcript feature, but if you have the budget, live captioning is great. Also, sign language interpretation for your in-person events. And finally, we want to make sure that you partner with an AV company that can manage both the in-person production needs of your event as well as a live stream. That is the best way that you're going to save on costs. You'll also want to make sure that you've got a confidence monitor for your in-person host so that they can see the virtual guests as well as react to them. And if your budget allows, having a larger screen on your stage that shows all of the virtual attendees, if that's part of your purpose, that allows everyone to see them and have that connection. And then, as I just mentioned too, having mics for your in-person guests so that the virtual guests can hear them. Next, we're going to just touch on some platforms and tools to consider for your hybrid events, just to define them as well, so we're all on the same page about what I'm talking about. An event platform is the platform that your event takes place in. So this is where your live stream runs through. It's also a place where people can build those connections. So these are more robust because they include other features like social walls. You can add additional content to it, like speaker bios. Oftentimes these also have virtual exhibit halls, so your sponsors can have a place for sponsor recognition. It's also a place for them to meet with your attendees. They can also have like virtual cocktail hours hosted on these. These are great if you have a very big event that you really want to build that connection, things like a conference. The live streaming platform is what you're using to run the stream. So Zoom is one of those, YouTube. These are also platforms that you can do your virtual event on. That's a little bit more simpler, but still gets the job done well. Engagement tools, definitely recommend using what's built into your live streaming platform or your event platform. And it recommend that you have a strong strategy on how you're going to use them. And again, going back to why you're going to use them. The last thing that I'll mention is like virtual photo booth. There's an actual service for that called OutSnap. Or it's as simple as using an event hashtag or a shared folder where people can upload their photos to. Just ways that we are building a shared experience between and amongst all of our audience types. So these are just a few of the best practices that have helped me manage hybrid events. I'm going to drop in the chat a link to, this was the Powering Creativity launch event that won that CASE award. This is from 2019, so keep that in mind. The lighting quality is not the best, but you get the idea of how we were managing a 250-person in-person event, as well as a remote audience, and trying to give them as comparable an experience as we could. So Ellen, I take it back to you.
Chelsea, can I ask you one question about that last slide before you go on? So are there some of these that have worked better for you, or that are more easy to use than others?
Well, I've used several of these for my events. It goes back to what your event is and why you're doing it. So, for example, I have used Socio for large fundraisers at School of the Arts, because at the time, we were 100% remote. We were not doing any in-person or hybrid events, but we wanted to still be able to replicate our annual production of the Nutcracker, as well as our scholarship fundraiser. So these were great ways that we could host all of our attendees in the same space. They could also direct message each other. They could post on a social wall. So we encouraged people to take pictures for the Nutcracker, take pictures of their opening night outfit and post it on the social wall. So it gave people the opportunity to see each other. They could comment on each other's photos. For that one, we had a pretty extensive sponsor list. So all of our sponsors had their own pages that they could have a virtual sponsor booth for. We also hosted virtual cocktail hours for selected guests through that platform. I've also done events on Zoom that have been fairly complicated, with lots of videos and music on it. And those have worked really well. Again, utilizing the chat extensively, putting a lot of commentary in the chat, encouraging conversation in the chat, answering questions that people have. So it really just, it depends on what your event is, why you're doing it, and what you hope to accomplish.
All good? Keep moving? Okay, great. So I'm including this slide here. I realize that not everybody here on this call is necessarily connected to fundraising. The donor guru is someone else that we follow, as she speaks often about gatherings and events, virtual events now, hybrid events as well. And the reason I'm including this is really the last sentence. I think you can insert any audience here and it makes sense. But if we're going to dabble a little bit in the big picture, which is what I like to do, the donor experience is everyone's responsibility, and it requires more than just a thank you letter and an endowment report. It's a mindset. And I think that that's true as it relates to any audience. So whether that be peer institutions or faculty and staff, or potential students, parents and families of potential students, I think that when it comes down to it, it really is the responsibility of all of us for the communications arm of the university, and it really truly is a mindset. In 2020, 2021, we hired a consultant to come in and do an events assessment across the university. It's the first time we've ever done that here since I've been here, so in 15 years. And here are a couple of key takeaways that I thought was relevant to this group. Overwhelmingly, and so you understand, the assessment was complicated. There were four phases to the assessment. It included the deans, chief communications officers, chief development officers, and event planners in each of the colleges, and then some select units. Key takeaways: culture of collaboration is the key strength here at the university. At the same time, though, working in silos was identified as the #1 barrier to outcomes for success. And then thirdly, it was time that we start to change the narrative and to help people understand that quality vendors good technology, good tools for events are investments and not expenses. And I think that we think about them as expenses, but truly when it comes down to it, when we're looking at marketing this university and communicating what's so great about this place, these are investments in the work that we do as communicators. Why does all this make sense for NC State? Excellence in special events and the strategic priorities go hand in hand. Goal number 6 of the Powering the Extraordinary is to be recognized as a leading university for innovative partnerships and entrepreneurial thinking and applied problem solving. My team has to be tired of hearing me say this all the time. Our brand is think and do. Our brand is that we are telling our faculty and our staff and our students, well, really our faculty and students, to go break things and build them better. But when it comes to oftentimes the work that we do ourselves, we are afraid to break them and make them better. But that's what we do at NC State. That's our brand. And so we need to live the brand as much as we speak it. And then goal number 7, elevate the national and global reputation and visibility of NC State. That goes without saying. Anytime you have an audience, remember, take this back to the beginning of the presentation, where 2 or more are gathered, this is an opportunity to elevate the reputation of NC State. And so when we think about things like working in silos and collaborating, it brings me back to the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats. So when we reach out and we collaborate and we partner, we only strengthen each other and we raise the tide and it lifts all of our boats. So with that, that ends our presentation. Janine, you did share with us the questions that people had submitted before today. And so we hope that we talked about some of those, but thought we would just open it up now for any questions, answers, any conversation that that we might have.
Thanks so much, Ellen and Chelsea.
If there are no questions, it just means we covered everything. Deborah, you had a question or a thought?
A question actually. So what we've found a couple of times in our hybrid events, and you guys touched on it, but I want to dig into it a little deeper. Neither, it seems like the in-person audience doesn't know if they should be asking questions or if the hybrid audience should be engaging or asking questions. And then it seems like the hybrid audience is doing the same thing. It's hard to get engagement and questions from the audience if nobody knows who's supposed to be asking the question. How do you deal with that?
That's a great point. Chelsea, do you want to answer first? And
I will take my best effort. Not knowing how that event was run, my first guess is that you need a good host who's going to lay down the rules for how people should participate in that event, or whatever your pre-event communications are. Let people know. We encourage you to ask questions, to engage in conversation. I would instruct your host, your MC, whoever is leading that conversation, to say, any of our virtual attendees, do you have a question? So that they are directed and invited to speak, as opposed to, does anyone have any questions? Because at that point, it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to be that person. But if you're more directed as to which audience you're talking to at that time, it opens it up for that specific group to say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. I think if you have your virtual chat moderator, that person can also be encouraging folks. If you don't want to say your question on camera, feel free to type it in the chat and I will ask it for you. And that person then communicates to your event host. We have a question in the chat. It is this. How would you answer that?
Yeah, and I would only add to that, Deborah, that it goes back a little bit to Priya Parker and her rules, ditching the etiquette for the rules. I think this is one of those situations where etiquette, when you have a hybrid audience, in person, online, people are wondering, well, who really is what's the hierarchy here of audiences? And I think that when you ditch that etiquette, that there really is no hierarchy in the audiences, and you set a rule for how to engage, that really just opens opportunities for everybody. And then I would just follow that up with just make it really easy to ask questions for both groups, and clear for everybody. It just takes a couple of people to ask questions on both sides for then it to become more familiar to everybody in the room. Amanda, I hope that helped, Deborah. Amanda?
Yeah, hi. Thank you guys. This is definitely helpful. In my brain right now, I'm preparing a symposium in the fall. So we are in the process of hiring Wolf Bites to do our AV for our hybrid portion. And one of the things I often struggle with the hybrid model is how to try to get the virtual audience to be able to have that face-to-face engagement with the in-person audience. And in my mind, I have a vision of, well, we can do breakout rooms that allow those virtual attendees to interact with each other. But do you have any ideas or suggestions on ways for the virtual and in-person individuals to be able to interact?
Ellen, you want to try or I have a thought.
Go ahead.
I haven't done this before, right? Because I haven't really planned meetings or seminars, but I have seen in a webinar before that the people who are in person, they're all seated at tables. You also have a laptop or a monitor on that table, so that they can see the virtual audience. And then whenever you go into those small conversations, they each have mics so they can talk directly to the people who's right in front of them virtually. That would be one suggestion. If your budget allows, let me marinate on that and I might follow up with you later.
I did see where this was done pretty well. I will preface it with they had a pretty big budget, but they're in person. They did breakouts. Their in-person people went to breakout rooms, and then they were paired with virtual breakout rooms, if that makes sense. So then it was a mix of in-person and virtual breakout rooms. That does require a little bit of a break in your program and everybody going to different spaces. So depending on what your in-person event space is like, will determine whether or not that will work well. And then the technology is key there. So working with a team that can support that technology. And again, this goes back to the investing in events is an investment, not an expense. So if you think about it that way. I did have a colleague at another institution who said that they were going to try and pair participants. So they were going to try and pair a live participant with a virtual participant before the event, and then hope that they would be like buddies. But then
that's a neat idea. Like the in-person could be the voice for the virtual person.
Yeah,
almost.
or just kind of be like, oh, Amanda,
a neat
you
idea.
should see how, how rainy it is here, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that got a little dicey, I think, as they got closer, because the pairings were dropping off because of attendance. So that may be more work than it's worth, to be honest with you. But I thought, for a small group or something like that, that was kind of an interesting thought. And we'll be anxious to hear from you to see, how you do that. There are other things in technology, like the owl, if anybody's using.
Yeah, we have the owl and it works. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and definitely, I think for us, definitely those kind of meal times. So the lunchtime session, poster sessions, and trying to provide that virtual option to attend personal. And that's where that one-on-one pairing up might be nice. where you can take a virtual person around with you to the poster sessions and that type of thing. So, okay, great. Thank you for the
just
thoughts.
one last thing on that. I would just say, again, going back to the etiquette versus the rules. When you break down the etiquette, it really kind of breaks down some walls and creates a little bit more vulnerability, whether you're in person or online. And that vulnerability creates authenticity in your gathering. And that is where the magic happens. When you create authentic moments for people and create a space, whether they're in person or online, that to me is where like people's minds open and their hearts open and they come to the event full on. So John, you had a question.
Yes, thank you for this. I did not even know CALS had a special event unit, and so I'm happy to learn that. One quick question, are you and your staff available to help in the planning at the proposal stage? A team of mine around the country are planning a combined event, and if this is part of your mission, I'd be happy to talk to you offline about some details.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, I, as an event nerd, will talk about events all day long, John. So absolutely. So I will mention that CALS itself has an event team, an excellent events team. You are among the few, though, when we did the events assessment, only 3 of the colleges are working with a professional event planner, and the rest of the colleges do not have event planners. So their admins, their faculty, their fundraisers are planning events, other duties as assigned. So I know that your events team in CALS, they are great. I would love to sit down and talk about strategy and purpose of events with you and your team at any point. So that's a passion of mine, is the big picture for events. So if that's something that would be helpful to you, let's absolutely connect.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
With Zoom, I don't know who raises their hand first or second, but Dinah, you're next on my grid.
Hey, Ellen, it's really good to see you and Chelsea.
You too.
We might have a big event coming up in April, so we'll keep
We
taking care of
do.
you.
Plant sciences. This is an example. Rising tide lifts all boats. Plant sciences is one of those examples.
Just maybe. Well, listen, after a month after that big event, I have another big event with a board meeting. And I guess I'm just really curious because, again, I work closely with Deborah Thompson with NCARS, and we have been doing all of these virtual events, and we've recently started trying to do our hybrid events. I'm really, and maybe it's a technology question, but I am concerned. I'm going to have a room for the board, which is 32 members, but once everyone's in the room, I'm going to have almost 50 people in a room. And we do have, we are probably going to do some kind of a hybrid model. I'm really concerned with the technology. And while we do know what the OWL is and we have it, I'm just wondering, as the board is having discussions and we're trying to include people who've called in, or they're on the Zoom, I'm not seeing success stories with that hybrid happening with good discussions because of the background noise. Do you pass a mic around? Does somebody get up and go to a podium? And again, I missed the first 15 minutes of this. You may have covered that, but again, we talk about it, but I've not seen it actually work. And I know we're in early days, but I really want to try and nail this because I think hybrid's going to be around for a while.
Yeah, I agree with you. Chelsea, do you
Thoughts?
do you want to
Have
take
you seen something successful?
Not yet, but my thought would be to have a microphone or several microphones at School of the Arts. I don't know what they're called, but they're these really cool microphones that just sit on the desk, and everyone who's participating in the meeting, whether you're virtual or in person, presses a button and their mic is live, and then they can speak. And that just really helps the people who are participating virtually be able to hear what's going on in that meeting. That would be my first recommendation.
So yeah, those are those congressional mics. So you press the button. And Dinah, I don't know if you were on the call when we were talking about it, but one of the things that we're working hard to do in University Special Events is to change the soundtrack and change the conversation so that those of us who are planning events can help others understand that good technology, good tools, good partners are investments, not expenses. And so I would say where you can, hire a really good partner for your technology. So somebody who can provide microphones or one microphone for people in person to go and use that is going to be crisp and clear. The real outlier here are those who are participating remotely, because you can't control them as much as you can the in-person people. But that's where setting rules and reminding people the rules, less etiquette, more rules, is important. So and then we also just have to realize that we are in a human business, and human things are going to happen. So allow for those BBC moments. That's what they call them, the BBC moments, where the child in the walker walks in the room, while the guy's given the news, the very important news interview. Those are just going to happen with the hybrid model. They just are. And there's not much that we can do about that. But the more that you can control your in-person audio, and then the more you can help people to understand what it means to participate as a remote participant, is great. I do know a colleague who asked all remote participants to log in early to test their mics. That is, I think, maybe a good thing if you have the bandwidth to do that, because that's really important, I think, particularly for people who are calling in from their phone. Zoom is a little bit better than I think those phone participants personally.
That's really good, Ellen. That's a really good suggestion.
Hope that helped. Hey, Emma, do you still have a question?
Hi, yes, I do.
Great.
So I'm pretty new to planning hybrid events specifically, and I was wondering if you guys see a similar percentage of people who register versus the people who actually show up. Do you see a lot more virtual participants, or I wonder if you guys have any experience with that?
Yeah, I'm going to start, and then Chelsea, you jump into, but yes, I would say that overwhelmingly people reply positively for hybrid events, and then it's very easy to ghost a hybrid event.
Yes, a lot of people will register, and then you will get very little who actually attend.
Yeah. No doubt in my mind.
I mean, that's what it is now, but I think part of it also will depend on how engaging your event is, or how well you communicated what the event is and laid out and manage the expectations for those people. Because I think about the events that I did at School of the Arts, comparing the big ones like Nutcracker, our scholarship fundraiser, with the small ones that were on Zoom. The ones that we did on special event platforms that we put a lot of money behind had a higher attendance rate than the smaller ones that were free that we did on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. And
Can I add to that really quick? So this workshop was in person until March of 2020. And at times we would have 15 people, like plus was very rare and a super success in terms of quantity. And then since moving it totally virtual, the attendance rate has gone, the sheer numbers have doubled, tripled sometimes. And the participation, like the ratio of people who have said they're going to come and then actually come, is also still better. And I've thought about making it hybrid eventually, but I know that it's so convenient for people to attend virtually to something like this. I think that a lot of the events that Ellen and Chelsea put on, it takes away some of the magic when you have it in viewing it through your computer. But in like with workshops, this has worked. My numbers are way better than they were once upon a time.
Yeah, so that just goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, that it goes back to your purpose. Why are you doing this event and what do you hope to accomplish? That's how you really determine if hybrid or virtual or in person is the best format for it.
Thank you.
Exactly that.
Quick follow-up with registration. Would you recommend having people commit to whether they're attending in person or online? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Because you're gonna, well, I mean, just practical things, right? You're gonna need to know how many seats to have in the room and that sort of thing. But then you also have to know, is your Zoom, if let's say you're doing a Zoom, is it big enough to accommodate, or do you have to go to a Zoom webinar? So all those things are critical for you to know in advance.
Yeah, I was just going to add too, as far as the virtual registration drop off. I will admit I'm a guilty party of this, is that sometimes I can't make all the meetings that, or the, like say the webinars and conferences that are being offered, because I'll triple book, but I'll still sign up because I know I can get the recording later. And so I've debated, Emma, with that is on that registration of the, are you thinking you might really attend, or are you just wanting the recording after this meeting is done to try to give a better image? Because that's one of, again, I'm a guilty party of that. And it's a nice feature to have, but I think that's where some of that drop off really happens.
Yeah.
We probably have time for one more question. Anything top of mind? I was just looking through the question portal that from registration and seeing if there was anything that would work. And then there was one question. Oh, it was answered. Well, thank you so much, Ellen and
Right
Chelsea.
on. That's always good.
For attending today. And will you all share your PowerPoint with me, and I can share it with the group? And then also, I think, does it include your contact information if people have questions down the road?
Currently, no, but we can add it.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming. Next month, we are talking about photos for stories. What is the best photo for your story, in-story layout ideas, tips for cropping and resizing, and using stock photos. That will be on April 14th. Thanks so much again to Ellen and Chelsea. Appreciate you all. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you.